In Honduras, the democratically elected president, Manuel Zelaya, has been overthrown in a military coup. He was forced from the presidential palace and flown to Costa Rica early Sunday after he tried to hold a non-binding referendum to extend his term in office. Speaking to the television network Telesur, Zelaya called his ouster a kidnapping and urged U.S. support for restoring his government.
Es un secuestro, es una extorsión al sistema democrático hondureño.
This is a kidnapping. This is an extortion of the Honduran democratic system. And I will ask the presidents of the Americas, including the U.S. president, I want to hear the U.S. ambassador Hugo Loren in Tegucigalpa, if they are behind this, and if not, clear it up. Because if the U.S. is not behind this coup, they won't be able to stay there 48 hours.
Following Zelaya's ouster, the Honduran Congress swore in the former parliamentary speaker, Roberto Micheletti, as interim president. Micheletti immediately imposed a 2-day nationwide curfew, but thousands of Zelaya supporters remain on the streets. Shots were reportedly fired at protesters near the presidential palace earlier today. There have also been reports of the brief arrest of ambassadors from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Speaking in La Paz, Bolivian President Evo Morales condemned the coup.
Hago un llamado a los organismos internacionales.
I am calling on international organizations. I am calling on social movements of Latin America and of the world. I am calling on presidents of democratic countries to condemn and repudiate this coup in Honduras.
The Obama administration's criticized the coup and said it will only recognize Zelaya as the Honduran president. Zelaya's overthrow marks the first Central American military coup in quarter of a century. We'll have more from Honduras after headlines. The House has narrowly passed a climate bill that would limit greenhouse gas emissions and impose a cap-and trade system, allowing firms to trade emissions permits. The measure would cut emissions 17% below 2005 levels by 2020 and 83% by 2050. The measure passed by a slim margin Friday of 219 to 212. President Obama hailed the vote as a major victory.
The fact is, just weeks ago, few in Washington believed that this day would come to pass.
Most Republicans vote against the measure. The Hill newspaper reports House Minority Leader John Boehner even referred to the bill using an expletive, but several Democrats also opposed it for not going far enough to reduce pollution. Environmentalist critics say the emissions cuts are too low and could be easily avoided through flawed methods of monitoring compliance. The measure also provides billions of dollars in subsidies for the coal industry. In congressional debate before the vote, Congressmember Dennis Kucinich called the measure a boon for polluters.
The bill allows 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year, roughly equivalent to 30% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Supporters of the bill point out that coal use will increase by 2020 because electric utilities will continue to use dirty coal, the prime source of pollution. With 2 billion tons of offsets per year, we're told electric utilities will reduce carbon emissions at places other than their generating plants. So they really don't have to actually decrease their emissions, and coal-fired CO2 emissions will increase through 2025. No wonder there are 26 active coal plant applications. Increased CO2 emissions will be our gift to the next generation. Apparently, the planet is not melting. With this bill, it's just getting better for polluters.
The Justice Department has reportedly determined foreign prisoners enjoy at least some constitutional rights if tried by military commissions in the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Obama administration's been advised that prisoners are entitled to protections from statements against them obtained through coercive interrogation. The opinion was delivered by the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel last month. It suggests military tribunal convictions could be overturned if based on statements obtained through coercion. The news comes as the Washington Post reports the Obama administration has begun drafting new rules that would authorize the indefinite jailing of Guantanamo prisoners. White House officials have reportedly backed Bush administration assessments that up to 90 prisoners should not be charged or released. The Justice Department, meanwhile, has announced a widely anticipated CIA Inspector General report on the Bush administration's torture program will be delayed until shortly before the upcoming July 4th long weekend. It's the second time the Obama administration's delayed the report's release. In Iran, government forces used tear gas and batons Sunday in a crowd of around 3,000 people protesting the disputed national elections. The protests had been one of the few allowed amidst the ongoing crackdown on opposition groups who've accused authorities of rigging the election in favor of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Iranian authorities, meanwhile, have released 5 out of the 9 British embassy workers jailed in Tehran. Iran has accused the workers of stoking anti-government protests, a charge Britain denies. U.S. forces are facing a deadline tomorrow to withdraw from Iraqi cities and towns. In most cases, they'll be shifted to areas encircling the places they leave. American forces will also remain in the town of Mosul for an indefinite time. Appearing on Fox News Sunday, the top commander of U.S. forces in Iraq, General Ray Odierno, said Iraqi forces are ready to assume control.
In May, we had the lowest level of incidents we've ever had on record in Iraq. In the first 3 weeks of June, we did as well. You've seen a slight uptick this past week with these high-profile attacks. But again, I would say these are just extremist elements that are attempting to bring attention to themselves. And I think this is the right time for us to turn responsibility over to the Iraqis.
In Pakistan, an estimated 10,000 people took part in a rally Sunday denouncing U.S. military drone attacks on Pakistani soil. Pakistani political leader Syed Munawar Hassan said the U.S. presence in the region is bringing violence and militarization.
इस रीजन से जितने फॉरेन ट्रूप्स हैं, NATO और दूसरी फोर्सेस हैं, उनको फौरन वापस चले जाना चाहिए.
All foreign troops, NATO and other forces should immediately go back from this region. America should leave this country and this region. The presence of the U.S. and NATO forces will intensify the extremism and terrorism here. It was a peaceful land, which now has been turned into terrorist soil by Americans and its allies.
At least 60 people were believed to have been killed in the latest U.S. drone attack in Pakistan's South Waziristan region last week. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the U.S. has declared an end to its poppy eradication program. Speaking at the G8 summit in Italy, U.S. Special Envoy Richard Holbrooke declared the program a failure.
The Western policies against the opium crop, the poppy crop, have been a failure. They did not result in any damage to the Taliban, but they put farmers out of work, and they alienated people and drove people into the arms of the Taliban. So I need to stress this. The poppy farmer is not our enemy. The Taliban are. And to destroy the crops is not an effective policy, and the U.S. has wasted hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on this program. And that is going to end. We are not going to support crop eradication.
In Israel and the occupied territories, United Nations investigators have begun a probe into war crimes and other violations of international law during Israel's military assault on Gaza beginning last December. Israel's refused to cooperate with the investigation, forcing investigators to enter Gaza through Egypt. On Sunday, the panel held the first day of public hearings with residents of Gaza City. President Obama has issued a signing statement refusing to comply with several provisions of the $106 billion war funding bill he signed into law last week. Obama says he'll ignore a congressional mandate to pressure the World Bank to strengthen labor and environmental standards. Obama's also rejected a provision calling for the Treasury Department to report on the World Bank and IMF's activities. The war funding bill included billions of dollars for the IMF. The signing statement is Obama's sixth since taking office. The investigative website ProPublica and the Washington Post are jointly reporting the industrial giant GEO has become a major beneficiary of the taxpayer-funded Wall Street bailout, while avoiding many of the attendant restrictions imposed on participating firms. GE's financial arm initially failed to qualify for the bailout, but ended up taking part after regulators eased eligibility rules. Assistance to GE so far accounts for nearly a quarter of the $340 billion in debt secured by the government bailout. Events were held around the world this weekend to mark the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall uprising that launched the modern-day gay and lesbian rights movement. The uprising began the morning of June 28, 1969, when members of the gay community decided to fight back against New York City police raid on the Greenwich Village gay bar known as the Stonewall Inn. Here in New York, organizers say around 500,000 people marked the anniversary Sunday at the annual Gay Pride Parade. You can go to our website at democracynow.org to hear an excerpt of the documentary Remembering Stonewall by Dave Isay. And the jailed financier Bernie Madoff is being sentenced today in a New York courtroom. Madoff has pleaded guilty to running the biggest Ponzi scheme in history, defrauding investors of some $64 billion. He faces up to 150 years in prison. Defense attorneys are seeking a 12-year sentence. 10 of Madoff's dozens of victims have asked permission to address the court today in support of a lengthy jail term. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.